You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank because I have to be. Today, we're going to have a fun show. We have a gentleman here by the name of Micha Berman. He is the author of a book called Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship. This man knows how to make dreams come true. He is also in the voice industry. He's known as Micha The Mouth, and we're going to talk about that as well. This gentleman is very diverse. He's got the #1 selling book in the category of travel on Lulu.com. He's also one hell of an entertainer. Welcome to Frank Talks, Micha Berman.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
I'm doing great, and how are you, sir?
Doing awesome, thanks.
All right, let's start off with our first question. Where were you born? And tell me everything that led up to you getting into the cruise ship industry.
Well, I'm actually a fascinating question. I mean, I was actually born in the Middle East. I was actually born in Israel. But my parents are Dutch. My mom is from Holland, and my dad is from South Africa. They met there for a couple years, and then I was born, and then when I was just a little kid, about 3, my dad had to decide between 2 American cities, Boston and Baltimore, and he chose Baltimore. So that's actually where I grew up. And so I come from, I don't actually have relatives in the United States, so all my relatives are overseas. And as a little kid, I had a really tough time kind of adjusting into school. I didn't really speak the language, but I had a couple little buddies who picked me up, and very early on, comedy and making jokes was really my way in. It was really a way to avoid being beat up, which unfortunately my brothers didn't have the same sense of humor, so they had to take the hard road. But, I found out early on that I could make jokes and I could do little tricks. I was kind of famous in elementary school for spitting in the music teacher's drink when she turned her head, and then came back later on, everyone was giggling, and I actually got pointed out as the person that did it. That was after she had drank it. So, early on I kind of figured out, I wasn't a big kid, but I was a kid that could make some faces, and I could, do little shows with my thumbs. And so I think all this early stuff going on where I had my own little talk show, my own little news reports that I would do with my buddies was kind of a precursor to later on going into entertainment and going into, and actually really later on getting the job as a cruise director for Carnival Cruise Lines. So that's a little bit of my background of where I came from. I think also a lot of where I came from and where I come from right now, and this is where I think a lot of people can get a lot out of my experiences, I've always been very conflicted. I've never quite figured out what I should do. Now, I knew early on that I could make people laugh, but I also came from a family where my dad's a physician, and it was very much education and very much, pushing me towards a certain way to be a lawyer, to be a doctor. And so for me early on, I think I had this inner conflict of wanting to be creative and wanting to go after my dream and what really felt good in my inner gut, but at the same time, not really pursuing that, but just kind of going to college, getting several graduate degrees, going into law school. And I think, probably later on we'll talk a little bit about my experiences where this conflict really erupted, and I had to make some really, really tough decisions that were very painful and a lot of obstacles. But that's a little bit of the background. I very early on got into high school theater. I went into college theater. And as I was doing this, I was kind of dabbling when I lived in New York City with the idea of doing voice work, and I went to acting school. But I think really early on, it was pretty clear that, I had that sense of humor, and I had kind of a different way of kind of looking at the world. And I felt very, didn't have a lot of limits in terms of what I would talk about, which felt very good within the acting community. Once you're in that acting community, there's no holds barred. You can pretty much say anything. So I was passing back and forth between that community and then the more traditional kind of 9-to-5 work community. So I think that's a little bit of a background of where I come from. Growing up in Baltimore, I ended up going to college in the South. I went to the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, which was fantastic. Experience, and then from there, I ended up living in New York City. I went to graduate school in Washington, D.C., then spent a year at sea on a cruise ship, and eventually settled back in New York City, and then where I would eventually meet the woman that I would marry, and then she kind of, put a rope around me, got me up in a plane, and took me over to the West Coast to San Francisco. and that's where I've been ever since.
So much information there.
I know. I can just keep going.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I want to start off by asking you about your multicultural family background.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that having that kind of background helps you now, or I should say was key in dealing with people on the cruise ship? Because, as you said, you didn't know the language, you didn't have any family here.
Yep.
You found your way to fit in and make friends. You said that your brothers did not.
Right, right.
And I'm very curious as to what was it about having a multicultural family background that you found a strength in, whereas other people might allow themselves to become victims?
Well, it's a great question. I can tell you that when I talk to people about working on cruise ships, it is a crucial skill that you be able to work with people different than you. I mean, you're thinking about 800 to 1,000 crew members, most of them not American. You've got all kinds of different cultures, religions, sexual orientations. And so when people always say to me, well, what's important in my interviewing for cruise ships, I always say, well, one of the huge things besides being able to survive on a cruise ship and be out at sea is, can you get along with different types of people? Because you're going to be thrown into this ocean of people, all kinds of different people. And I can get into more detail about that. But I came from that background. So, I came from a mom who spoke Dutch, a dad who was from Africa. I mean, very, very different background. And I do think that gave me strength. I also ended up marrying a Japanese-American woman. So right away there, I'm very diverse. Now, coming from the Jewish background, there was a strong pressure to marry someone Jewish. There was a strong pressure to follow the Jewish religion. I don't do any of those. I mean, I married someone not Jewish, and I don't follow the Jewish faith. So I've always kind of had my own independent streak, and that's been a source of tension. But, as I got older, I realized I had to stay true to who I was, because, I had that epiphany one day, just, you live your own life. I mean, you end up in your own room looking out the window, and no one really is watching you. I mean, you may have your parents calling you and telling you what you should do. You may have people in the community saying this is right and this is wrong. But in the end, when you close the door, there's no one in the room but you. And you are living your life. The clock is ticking. And so you either make the decision to live a false life, which I just don't see the point of, because, again, no one's watching, so who are you doing it for? Or you follow your convictions. So I'm getting off track a little bit, but back to the multicultural, it really has been a strength. It allowed me to survive on the cruise ship, and I really got a kick out of it. I mean, I really do enjoy people, meeting people from different faiths and different cultures. I'm totally open. I live in San Francisco here. You hear it's quite a liberal in terms of acceptance of people. And it's just always been what I believe in. And so, again, it is a skill. It works for me every day. And I think it enriches my life. My brothers, I mean, I was joking about them. They've ended up doing fine. One of them did marry someone who's Jewish, and I've always kind of respected my parents for, even though that was an issue for them, as life went on, they ended up being on the side of love and not being on the side of, well, you have to marry someone who looks exactly like you. Interestingly enough, the Japanese are very similar too. My wife's parents would have loved her to marry someone who's Japanese, but she didn't, So, this is the way life is. And, interestingly enough, and I'm kind of fascinated by this, that life kind of takes you in a full circle. My mom, who was Dutch during the 1940s, was a little 7-year-old girl who was in a prisoner of war camp in the Dutch West Indies. Now, that is now Indonesia, but back in the 1930s and 40s, that was called the Dutch West Indies. Her family, who was Dutch, fled Holland to escape the Nazis, ended up in the Dutch West Indies, and then the Japanese took over those islands and put most of the people into prisoner of war camps. Glenn Close would later on do a movie called Paradise Road about those camps. Well, my mom obviously has a very bad connotation, a bad feeling about Japan and anything Japanese, but then I would marry a Japanese woman. So, kind of life came full circle. And I think in many ways she's learned to be a little bit more multicultural. So, a lot of interesting twists and turns with this whole multicultural. But for me, it really doesn't faze me. But it is a crucial skill for anybody who's thinking of going to work on a cruise ship.
Okay, let's take this a little bit further, because you're touching on so many things that are important, specifically how to get along with so many different types of people. Obviously, you grew up in an environment where, as you say, you were pressured into following a certain path.
Sure.
How do you deal with people on a cruise ship who, let's say, because of their cultural backgrounds or their own life experiences, we'll say, are they themselves not the easiest people to get along with? And how do you balance that?
It's tough. Cruise ships, in my book I talk a lot about the idea that there's very few Americans working on cruise ships. One of the reasons is it's a tough environment. I mean, when people hear about working on a cruise ship, the first thing that kind of comes to mind is the dream job, is the passion, is the sunshine, is the swimming pools, is going off on these exotic ports. The reality is that 99% of all people who work on cruise ships don't get to get off the cruise ships. They work 14 hours. They work long times. They have to be in uniform. They're not allowed to go into certain areas of the cruise ship. I worked in the 1% of the ship that I had total privileges, and I often wasn't even in uniform, so people didn't even know that I worked on a cruise ship. But I did you have to live in small quarters. There's like 7 levels below the passenger levels where there's hundreds and hundreds of crew members, sometimes living 2 to 3 a cabin. I, for a long time, had my own cabin, but sometimes I had to share a cabin. And there are great stories in my book about these 2 men that poured boiling water over themselves in the middle of the night on the way to one of the islands, and we had to turn the ship around. There is this great conflict between people in such small quarters. But overall, most people figured out how to get along together or to kind of avoid each other if there was tension. I generally am pretty good at getting along with all types of people. I'm very good at quickly figuring out someone's person. This is a great skill, obviously, when you're in the work world and you got to figure out your boss and how to manage them and how to survive. And that's something I have to do very, very quickly. Now, I also ended up getting a master's in social work, so I have a background of kind of working with people very intensely and very hard people to work with, very challenged people with all kinds of personalities that have hurt them in their lives. And then I have to figure out, well, how do I get a relationship with them? So I've had a lot of experiences in my life where I've been thrown into places, like I've worked in the South Bronx in New York where I was the only white person and people basically didn't want to talk to me. Or, I've worked in, I kind of have this history of throwing myself into places that I know nothing about and having to survive. I've taken internships at dairy farms. I've worked at the Tony Awards in New York. I've worked in law firms. I worked in the U.S. Congress, places where I just had to kind of quickly figure out the system and survive. So I'm a survivor, and I've learned how to kind of manipulate within systems. And a lot of that skill is figuring out people and knowing when to back off, knowing when I can kind of be who I am, or knowing when I have to kind of be a chameleon, and change a little bit what I say and how I behave. So these are just kind of life skills that the best lesson that I ever had in college was a great economics professor at the University of Virginia who, at the end of the whole semester said, one of the most important things I can teach you is to be able to judge a good man from a bad man. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. It was kind of like when you leave college, you're going to have to somehow figure out a good person from a bad person. You're going to have to make that quick judgment because many people never learn that skill. And boy, do they get screwed and burned in their lifetimes because they just can't figure out quickly when they need to walk away or when they need to just say the word N-O. And that's a skill that I've never had a hard time doing. And it saves you a lot of time and effort because you have limited hours in the day. So you got to focus where you think you need to be, where you're going to actually have an impact.
I'd like to take this interview into a slightly different direction. I want to hear, when did you decide that you wanted to get a job on a cruise ship? And what was the procedure to even submit your candidacy for it?
Well, I began with it in a state of utter confusion and chaos. I figured it out when I was in graduate school and getting close to getting a graduate degree and understood that I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And, going a step or two back, I was actually enrolled in law school. So I got into some of the best law schools in the country, and I was in law school at the George Washington University Law School. I think it's in the top 20 or 30 in the country. And I went out and spent about $400 to $500 on books. And these books were bigger than me. I mean, I could hardly pick these books up. And I took the first book from one of my first classes, and I went to the library, and I opened it up in the first page, and I knew I had to read this case. It was something like, Railroad of Kentucky versus blah, 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 1852. And I started reading the first paragraph, and I couldn't get past the first sentence. I just kept reading it over and over again, and it had like 10 to 15 details in one sentence, and I just couldn't get it through my head, and I started reading it, and then I looked, and I pulled back, and I looked at the book. This book had like 1,000 pages, and I just said, I don't want to read it. I'm not interested. I don't care. And then I started to kind of cry, and I started to tear up, and I just kind of had this emotional outburst where I just kind of realized this is not for me. So I decided that moment to drop out of law school, and I had a meeting with my parents. It was just it was a very emotional thing, but I realized I was taking a left turn where all the momentum was taking me to the right, but I was saying I had to go left. I ended up, going to graduate school in something else, which again really wasn't the right decision, but it was something I did. And then in the end, and near the end of grad school, I said, you know what, I need to figure out what I really want to do. So I went out and bought a book called What Color's Your Parachute by Nelson Bowles. And this book has sold like 9 million copies. And for 2 weeks straight during spring break, all I did was just sit in my room, and I did every single exercise in the book. I wrote my obituary. I wrote a list of likes, dislikes. I wrote stories. They put you through this rigmarole of exercises. And when it was all said and done, and I just stayed in my room and just ordered food in for like 2 weeks, it came back with 2 results, that I should go into the circus or I should go into the cruise line industry. That's what it came out, because it had kind of processed everything I was good at, everything I had done. And I said, well, there's no way I'm going to work in the circus. That's too much of a freak show. So I am going to work on a cruise ship, because I found this unbelievable position of a cruise director where I could speak to people on a microphone, I could be in a non-traditional job, I could travel. Everything about the job seemed like an absolute perfect fit. And I started doing the research on it. I said, this is amazing. I have found the job for me. And then, so then I had to go about it. Now, the thing about cruise line industries, the thing about the voice industry, any of these jobs, they have really high walls. The barriers are incredibly high. I mean, if they were easy, everyone would do it. But no one can get in the walls. So you have to figure out how to get in. And with the cruise line industry, again, that 1% of jobs up there at that level where you're a cruise director or assistant cruise director, very, very tough to get in. So that began my job search, and what I called Project Random, which I chronicle in the first chapter of my book. I think that this chapter actually, and all the stuff that I did to get the job, can be applied almost for any job search that people do. But I went to incredible lengths, ranging from sending 2,000 to 3,000 letters to alumni from the colleges I went to, from a trip to Miami where I kind of got into offices and basically talked to people, to creating my own mini book about ideas for cruise ships, to, hundreds and hundreds of kind of stunts that I did, which eventually landed me in the offices of 8 of the biggest cruise lines in the world, where then I would eventually be offered jobs in 3 out of 4. But, this didn't happen overnight. This happened over a long period of time, and there was a lot of rejection along the way. But I became an expert in the cruise line industry by ordering every single magazine that you could get. And I just read it, and I just became familiar with every ship, with all the trends, and I started talking the language. So when I would talk to people in the cruise line industry, I was telling them stuff that they didn't know. So eventually, getting the job wasn't hard, because once I got in their office, they were like, who is this guy? This guy knows more. He's got so much to offer to us, So I ended up, getting a job with Carnival Cruise Lines, and I took it because they were the cruise line, they were the fun ships. They were for the single guy coming on who could just have, a trip of a lifetime meeting women. And that, at that point in my life, in my 20s, that seemed like an unbelievable thing to do. So I took that job. I was offered a job with Royal Caribbean and a couple of other big cruise lines. But that in a nutshell is my journey of how I got from a point of not knowing what I was going to do with my life to a point where I realized the cruise line was a great place to be, to the point where I became an expert and was able to use that skill to get in over that wall into a tough industry.
Everything that you've just said reminds me of one of my heroes, Frank Oz, who was one of the performers on The Muppets. In a documentary, he talked about how The Muppets was this overnight success. But what people didn't see was the 10 years it took to get to that overnight success. Yep. And when you figured out that you wanted to work as a director on a cruise ship, the fact that you subscribed to every cruise ship magazine out there that you became well informed. Most people don't work that hard just to go after an interest of theirs. So what was your motivation?
I have this incredible burning passion, which 9 out of 10 times works for me. It's kind of an obsessiveness. Again, it works for me most of the time. A lot of people might consider it an illness, to have that obsessive kind of drive where you just can't take no for an answer. And it will piss a lot of people off. You will build enemies. But in the end, to get these things that I'm talking about, whether you want to work on a cruise ship, whether you want to have a best-selling book, whether you want to break into the voiceover industry and do radio and TV commercials, you have to remember that a majority of all people will quit. Most people will not stay on the road. All the prizes are just a little bit up the bend. They will take years. I mean, I have 5, 10, 15-year plans around my voiceover work. And with the book, I had 2-year, 3-year plans. But regardless of how long the plan is, you have to go at it really, really hard. And it's exhausting. And as I said before, you build enemies because a lot of people can't take it. They don't like people that are that aggressive. But again, if you want to work in an ice cream store, which I think is great, and that's an awesome thing, and I'm not knocking ice cream store people, that isn't going to be as hard. If you want to land a national commercial, that's going to be tough. If you want to work on Carnival Cruise Lines as an assistant cruise director, that's going to be hard. There are going to be, thousands of people coming in after that same position. So how do you stand out? And, it reminds me of a story where I was talking to a college professor about resumes, and he took about 15 different pieces of paper, all different colors, white, pink, yellow, green, gray, and he just threw it on a table. And he said, quickly, tell me which one stands out. And, it's just one of those, it was the gray one. The gray one just jumped out at me. And that's the color of the resume that I took. So on a small scale, just an example of the resume. On a larger scale, how do you as a person stand out in this rat race to get to certain jobs that bring such glory and satisfaction? So back to your question, I can't explain it about myself. It's just a passion. It's just something that I can't control. It's just something I can't take no for an answer. I just have to keep going and going and going. And it drives people crazy. But in the end, it is what makes me successful. And in the end, with my book, it's what got me on radio shows. It's what got me on TV. It's what's made it a #1 bestseller. It's that ability to just keep going. And you got these people that come in front of you. They say no, they scream, they shout, they spit, they do everything to dissuade you. And even with the cruise ship, and I love my parents, but my parents were the first people to say, why do you want to work on a cruise ship? You've got to be able to get around the naysayers. You've got to get through them and surround yourself with people that smile and say, yes, go for it, as opposed to telling you all the reasons why you can't do it. So I think that's a little bit of a background of where I come from.
And with that, we're going to go to our first commercial break. You're listening to Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles. We'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. What would your life be like if you knew exactly what to say and do with women? Learn how to handle women's tests by addressing her emotional needs. By this, you create the type of attraction that will make her see you as the one. This book is a guide for men to understand exactly what a woman means when she speaks. Is that worth changing your life forever? Buy this book at franktalks.com now.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by The Eye of the Seducer, the Emotional Needs Analysis Workbook Volume 1. This workbook is designed to teach you to use the Frank B. Kermit seduction theories in the real world. It is based on Frank's book, Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test. What you're going to buy is the program developed by Frank as the head administrator of the Toronto Seduction Lair, specifically designed for newbies that want to learn relationship skills with women in the shortest time possible. These emotional needs analysis drills will skyrocket your success with women. This book teaches men how to think on their feet, not what to think. Never be stuck for something to say or do again. Finally, love will make sense, and you'll learn the skills to see through the games of others. Know what you did right, know what you did wrong, and what to do next. Buy this workbook now at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the book I'm a Man, That's My Job, The Philosophy of a Seducer. Your inner game is as unique and personal as your signature or your fingerprints. This book provides you with the means to create your own seduction persona. By this, learn what it means to be a man and attract the women you want. Learn about how men and women think differently and how to take the lead in a relationship. This book is for you at franktalks.com.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank because I have to be. In studio with me is Micha Berman. He is the author of the book Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship. And he's with us on Frank Talks, giving us one heck of an inspiring interview. Welcome back, Micha.
Thank you.
All right, I want to know now. I want to hear some of the routine stuff, some of the boring stuff. Tell me your day-to-day lifestyle working on a cruise ship. Give me the stuff that most people who are dreaming about this job don't always factor in, the stuff that they may not like.
Well, first of all, before we even get started, I'm going to say that there's two types of jobs on cruise ships. There's the one I did, and then there's all the rest of them. Because all the rest of them are long days cleaning the floors, basically taking care of passengers on the ship, but there wasn't that much glory and fun and passion in them. But I was very fortunate because I went in at the assistant cruise director level. So my day-to-day was what I call in one of the chapters of my book, Man on the Mic. Whenever there was an activity where someone had to be on a on a microphone, whether it was emceeing a newlywed game where people were stuffing ping pong balls into their bikinis, that's what I would do. If there was bingo, I would be on the microphone. If there was a limbo contest, I would be on the microphone. So, day-to-day I had a list of activities. But the great thing was there wasn't more than a couple hours of that every day. And then sometimes at night there might be an activity and I would do that. All the time in between was kind of my own time. I mean, I could go to the pool, I could work out, and, I'll go into a little bit, but the quick story is I actually changed my body on the cruise ship from 135 pounds to 185 pounds by working out 2 to 3 hours a day, eating all I could eat, and just lying on my bed and trying to watch movies. And I watched over 500 to 600 movies. And that was all trying to change my body. But that's a whole different story. But right now, just in terms of what I did on the ship, that was my day-to-day. Now, when the ship came into port, I didn't have people to deal with anymore. So I actually could get off the ship and enjoy the ports. In fact, some of the ports I had the right to be the first person off the ship because I used to love to play golf. And so the cruise director, and I know people are like hating me right now with all the stuff I'm saying, but what I'm trying to build up is that I actually had this unbelievable dream job. But there weren't that many of them on the cruise ship. So my job was to take care of the entertainers, dancers, musicians, singers, crew staff, all those folks. I had to kind of take care of them, making sure their cabins were okay, making sure that, everything from their passports to everything else. So there was an administrative side to the job. But any dealing with the personalities of the musicians and singers and fly-on acts, people who would just fly on for one day and night and then fly off again, those type of people too. They're not easy people to deal with, stand-up comics and jugglers and all those type of people. But in the end, it was a pretty good job, and it allowed me to pursue a lot of the things that I wanted to do with my free time. And, idle time is the devil's time, but if you know what to do with that time, I read the works of Shakespeare, I read the whole Bible, I watched over 600 movies. There were lots of things that I wanted to do with that time, and that allowed me to stay away from where a lot of people got into trouble on a cruise ship, from drinking, gambling, and, I could go on and on. So that's a little bit of a typical day for a person who's working as an assistant cruise director on a large cruise ship.
Now, my own particular interest is in the world of relationships.
Yep.
And prior to the interview, we had some email exchanges where you were telling me that you had actually written about relationships and romance on a cruise ship. So, can people find love on the Love Boat?
Well, this is a great, I mean, look, the Love Boat is the image that most people have. That was Princess Cruises. It was a huge hit. Every single man who worked on that ship, from the captain to the doctor to the they were all love crazed. They were all just wanted to be with women passengers on the ship. It was all about that. So I had to write a chapter in my book called Is There Love on the Love Boat? And I always joke that my wife, that's her least favorite chapter, but it's the chapter she went to first because she wanted to see it. And what she found in there was just, lots and lots of stories. When I came onto the cruise ship, as I said before, I was a 135-pound weakling who really had never been with women and didn't have any experience and didn't have a lot of confidence. And to be honest, when I got on the cruise ship, I didn't even understand what a gold mine the cruise ship was. What I did know was that there were 3 golden rules on the cruise ship. One of them was, and this is for crew, you were not allowed to dance on the dance floor, you were not allowed to sit on the stool, and you were not allowed to have romantic relationships with passengers. Those were the golden rules. Now, what I couldn't figure out was within the first couple months of the ship, all of the Italian crew, and Carnival has Italian crew, so you see all these officers, good-looking guys in their white uniforms. Within a couple days of the cruise, they were walking down the promenades, and on their arms were the most beautiful blondes on the ship. And so it's just like they were kind of just, doing this very openly. And the more I paid attention, I realized that, a lot of the crew were having all these romantic relationships with passengers. In fact, one of the cabin stewards who worked with the cruise staff, he had a photo album which had hundreds of pictures of different women from every state in the United States that he had actually had relationships with. And when he took his vacations from the Carnival ship, he would actually tour around the country visiting all the women. So there was this whole underworld of love, and I'm going to say love, but we're going to get into more detail because I'm not sure it really was love. But there was a lot of lust and passion that was going on in the ship, and a lot of passengers would meet crew members and then come back a couple months later on the same cruise just to see that same passenger. And there's some really, really funny stories. But when I realized this, I was like, oh my God. And I was in this very visible job where everyone saw me and knew me. And I had this, card that I could buy drinks any time of the day for free. I could just use my card and I could buy a bottle of champagne if I met someone. So I had these incredible tools. And so very on in the cruise, very early on, one night I had been drinking just a little bit, and I was walking down the promenade very fast. I was getting to an activity that I had to do, and I was late. And I turned a corner really fast, and there was this woman in her 20s who was a nurse from Philadelphia, and she was walking very fast. And we totally bumped and crashed into each other, nose to nose. And we both kind of looked at each other, and she was, she had been drinking too. And she kind of backed off a little bit, and she said, and she saw my name tag, because I have my name tag on there. And she said, oh, where is the buffet? And there was just like this 1 second of pause, and I looked back at her, and I said, well, I am the buffet. And she just grabbed my hand, and we just kind of wandered off. And that was kind of the beginning where I realized, oh my God, this is unbelievable. I am, and I had to drink a little bit because I was kind of not a confident guy. I never really could boost my energy and my confidence. And there's these funny stories in the book. In Permanent Passenger, where I talk about listening to music and kind of psyching myself up. And, I was fairly lame. I was listening to like Kenny G and Billy Joel, but, the drinks really helped. And in the end, I had lots of kind of romantic relationships. I'm really not so much of a kind of guy that's very good at the kind of the one night stand kind of going out, and I'm much more kind of a monogamous, serious guy. So it took a lot of wrangling and a lot of psychoanalysis to get myself to the point where I could just say, you know what? Just have fun. Just go out there. People are out here to have fun. Just go out, dance, have fun. Don't think about a serious relationship. And I was able to do that, but I still had some relationships that developed. Most relationships on ships happen between crew members themselves. A dancer and a singer, or a crew staff member and a musician. They rarely happen between passengers and crew members long term. I can tell you there were situations where I knew people ended up getting married, but most of the time it was just more light fun.
Now, in today's legal climate, where, employers are getting very, very sensitive to the issue of their employees mingling with their clientele, is it still going on?
It's going on, but I've been told by people that it's much stricter. But you're fooling yourself if you think it's not going on. I mean, it's definitely going on. It was going on a lot when I was in the ship. It's become, I think, a little bit less. I've been told by people on ships now, because I talk a lot to people on cruise ships now, that, certain cruise lines have gotten a lot harder and tougher about it. One of the trends in cruise lines is to have hosts on the ship, especially where there's senior women that come on the ship. A lot of the upper end cruise lines, like there's one called Crystal, and these cruise lines will hire older gentlemen to be, quote, hosts, which means they're dancing partners for single, widowed women that come on cruise ships. That's not so much about the lust. That's more about, company and people that are more lonely and want to have a companion. But there is still romantic, there's still love, it's like Las Vegas on water. It's very hard to control it. And there's a lot of drinking that goes on. So it puts people sometimes in dangerous situations. I mean, if you follow the news on cruise ships, you hear about rapes, you hear about people disappearing, you hear about domestic battles, you hear about all kinds of stuff. But, that's a small percentage. Most of the cases, people are just having a fun time.
Okay, here's a question for you based specifically on your experience. Is it better for singles to go on cruise ships, or is it something that couples should do together?
It depends on the cruise line. I mean, I talk a lot in my book about there's many different types of cruise lines. You have to figure them out. You have to become an expert. Whether you're going to work on them or whether you're going to be a passenger, you need to know the difference between Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Windstar, there's all, Cunard, there's all these different cruise lines. So if you're single, yeah, you may want to go on a Royal Caribbean or Carnival cruise line. You might even want to go on a cruise that's just for singles, because, they have charter cruises. If you're a family, I have 2 kids myself, I'm going to go on a Disney cruise line, or I'm going to go on, a celebrity cruise line that might cater more for children. But cruise lines have changed over time. Carnival has become a more family cruise. When I worked on Carnival, there was a lot of drunk people, and there was a lot of college kids. So things have changed, so you have to kind of really pay attention. There's a website called Cruise Critic, which is really good to figure out quickly what the cruise lines are and but so it's a question that you really have to do the research. There's a different cruise line for what you're looking for.
Let's talk about some of the sacrifices that you personally have had to make in order to work on a cruise ship.
Well, it was hard. I mean, the sacrifices have to do with the energy, time, and money that I had to devote to get the job. And that money involved, sending thousands of letters to alumni, because if you think about it, day to day, how many people do you know that work on a cruise ship? When you're walking out in the street and you're going into a Walmart or you're going grocery shopping, are you seeing people, or are you knocking into people that, know about the cruise line? So how do you make a connection into an industry where the people really aren't around you? You do that by making connections and networking into people who might have a connection to you, either through your culture, either through your location of where you live, either through your college. And I did it through my colleges, because, alumni can sometimes feel a real tie. So I made some really, really high connections into Carnival and Royal Caribbean through people that I knew. In fact, a girl that I had taken a trip through Europe with, who lived in Miami, when I told her, and you tell everybody, that's a golden rule. Tell everybody you're looking for a job on a cruise ship. She said, my mom goes to lunch with a high school friend of hers who works for Carnival. Well, it turned out that person was the number 2, he was the CFO. The chief financial officer for all of Carnival Cruise Lines was a school buddy of her mom. And so I immediately got an introduction, which actually got me into Carnival, which actually got me my job on Carnival. But, the time and effort to write a short little book with ideas for a cruise ship that I could bring with me, so that people, I would always tease them and say, I've got something to show you, and then I would come in and give it to them, and I would only give parts of it, and if they wanted to see me again, I'd say, I could show you more, and so those kind of things, they take time and energy, money to invest in going to Miami when I didn't have a job, but a risk, to get out there and have to get into offices and shake people's hands who said they wouldn't speak to me unless I was in Miami. So there were some real sacrifices. Then the ultimate sacrifice, to go to sea and leave your friends and family for a year not knowing where you're going. Once you're on that ship, you miss seeing your friends and family. And here's the real big zinger. Living on a cruise ship is a really weird, freakish world. It is not the world that we live on, like here with land. You don't always get to see an American newspaper. You don't always get to go to a movie theater or a cafe or have normal relationships. It is a very strange world. Many people who come back from working on cruise ships, they can't sleep because they need to kind of rock themselves to sleep. They're so used to being cradled on the cruise ship. And so there are a lot of sacrifices to that kind of world. Now, there are a lot of pleasures, and there's a lot of great things, but it's not easy. It's a challenge. And there's lots of temptations at sea to drink a lot of alcohol, and a lot of times you're paid in cash. And so you have this great temptation to take that money and gamble and do all kinds of stuff. So, I'm trying to paint the picture here that, there is a sacrifice, and many people are scared of that it's just kind of the unknown. And that's why I tell people, Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship has become a book that many people pick up before they go and work on cruise ships because it's kind of a textbook in giving them a little bit of a preview of what that life is going to be like.
Speaking of your book, I want to know, why did you write that book? What was the motivation behind it? Because you had worked in the cruise ship industry. There was no reason for you to write a book afterwards. I mean, you had already accomplished it.
That's such an easy question for me because when I wanted to work on a cruise ship, the first thing I did was go to a bookstore to buy a book about how to work on a cruise ship. And I couldn't find the book. It just wasn't there. There were so many books about how to take a cruise, different types of cruises, what you should bring on a cruise, but there wasn't a book about what it's like to live and work on a cruise ship. And so when I got on the cruise ship, and I got off and people would say, well, where have you been the last year? I would say, well, I just got off Carnival Cruise Lines. I was just working as an assistant cruise director for a year. And their eyes would light up. And they were like, what? You just worked on a cruise. What is that like? So many people had questions. So many people were fascinated. It almost seemed like everyone I talked to wanted to work on a cruise ship. And then I started realizing, hey, I've got to tell the story. Not only the story of how I got it, which was kind of a fascinating journey of how to get the job. It was most of the book is really about my life on the cruise ship and then how I got off the ship and moved to New York. But, I just realized that there was no book out there. And now, after I published it, there have been more and more books coming out about people who've worked on cruise ships, some of them from Carnival. But this is a really visceral gut trip. It's a gut journey of what it was like to take that leap into this world that I didn't know about, and then what it was, and then how it ended, because it ended very suddenly. I mean, it's a world that started off as a great dream, but after a while, I got tired of it because it wasn't the normal. I was seeking a relationship. I was seeking to be able to go to a cafe and read the New York Times. I mean, I'm a fairly normal guy in that way, and I missed it. And so I ended up having to get off the ship in a year. But there are people that have been on ships for 5, 10 years. The cruise director that I work with, he's been on cruise ships for 20 years. So it's a thing that people get sucked into, and many times they can't get off.
And with that, we got to go to our next commercial break. You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. We'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by From Loser to Seducer by Frank B. Kermit. Ladies, is there a man in your life that got dumped for being clingy, needy, or was told he was a loser, but you still think he's a nice guy and want to help him? He could be a relative or even a friend, and you know he needs the help. Do you want to be the one to give him the gift that will change his life forever? How about the gift of a great biography? Buy him the book, From Loser to Seducer by Frank B. Kermit. It is the story of a nice guy who triumphs over his inner demons to find his own hidden power. Help a nice guy in your life discover his inner seducer to find his soulmate. Buy this book now at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by The Eye of the Seducer, the Emotional Needs Analysis Workbook Volume 1. This workbook is designed to teach you to use the Frank B. Kermit seduction theories in the real world. It is based on Frank's book, Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test. What you're going to buy is the program developed by Frank as the head administrator of the Toronto Seduction Lair, specifically designed for newbies that want to learn relationship skills with women in the shortest time possible. These emotional needs analysis drills will skyrocket your success with women. This book teaches men how to think on their feet, not what to think. Never be stuck for something to say or do again. Finally, love will make sense, and you'll learn the skills to see through the games of others. Know what you did right, know what you did wrong, and what to do next. Buy this workbook now at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the book I'm a Man, That's My Job, The Philosophy of a Seducer. Your inner game is as unique and personal as your signature or your fingerprints. This book provides you with the means to create your own seduction persona. By this, learn what it means to be a man and attract the women you want. Learn about how men and women think differently and how to take the lead in a relationship. This book is for you at franktalks.com.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank because I have to be, and I am talking with Micha Berman, also known as Micha The Mouth. He is the author of the book, Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship. Thus far in the show, we've been talking about his life on a cruise ship and the book that he wrote that you can pick up. We're going to give you exactly where you can pick that up later in the show. But right now, I want to talk to Micha about the other great career that he has in the voiceover industry, and let's get some information on that. Welcome back, Micha.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, Micha The Mouth. Where did you get that name? What's behind it?
Well, first of all, to work in let me say this about the voiceover industry. If you thought that getting a job on a cruise ship was hard, then wait till you hear about the voiceover industry. This is an industry with high walls. Imagine for a living that all you did was get scripts on your computer and get to audition and go in and do radio and TV commercials. You always hear them on the radio, you always hear them on TV, and they pay very well, but you wonder, who does it and how do you get it? Well, I earlier alluded to the whole fact of early on in my life that I could feel that I like to entertain, and I had been hearing people say along the way, we like your voice, but I never quite put everything together. So again, this is a case where I figured out a career out of a lot of pain and suffering, because there came a point in my life where I was, I went and got a master's degree in social work. This was after I got off the cruise ship, and I was continuing to follow this path where I wasn't really going after my dream. And I ended up in a couple jobs where I was just kind of working and kind of staring out the window. And I kept thinking to myself, because I had dabbled a little bit in voiceover and I knew what it was and I'd taken some classes. And I was wondering, I feel so bad because I know that there are people out there that are doing it right now, that are taking the classes, that are doing this. And what are you doing? And I looked up at the clock, and this is where I said I heard the clock ticking. And I was like, who am I fooling? I mean, this is my life. These are the minutes of my life. They're disappearing. And I'm not doing anything. I'm staring out a window, sitting here crying and feeling pathetic while other people out there get to go after their dream. And that's when I made the decision. And this, by the way, this was like a week before my first baby was born. So my wife was not happy. But I realized I had to go after my dream. And I started enrolling in classes in voiceover. And, then it's a long journey. And we can get into details about that journey. But I studied a lot for 2 years. I ended up getting an agent. I started auditioning. And then I also got to the point where I had to brand myself, because a very big part of voice work is knowing who you are. What is your voice? Is it a voice that would be a scientist? Is it a voice that would be a businessman? Is it a voice that would be a cartoon character? Who are you? And you have to come up with a voice print. And a voice print is basically, if someone asks you really quickly, who are you? I would say, well, I'm smart, I'm warm, I'm quirky, And so that's kind of like what my voice is. That's what I get cast for in terms of my voice. But Micha The Mouth I have a very good friend who's a very, very good designer. He owns a design firm, and he's brilliant. And he does a lot of my work. He gives me a lot of, my business cards, my website. It's all done by him, and then I do all of his voice work. And he also owns a wine company, so on top of it, he gives me wine, so I love him to death. But he came up with this concept, Micha The Mouth. And it's a very quick, concise, it makes sense, it works. My agent knows me by that name, and every time I do a job, whether it's a radio, TV commercial, or narration, the producers always look at me when I give them the card, and they're like, I like that. So, it took a while. It's the same thing with Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship. I figured out the name because I figured out I was actually like a permanent passenger. People often didn't know who I was. I wasn't in uniform, but I lived on the ship. And so it really stuck. And so this Micha the Mouth is really has traction. But this voiceover is it's an absolute great opportunity, but it took years and years and years of, this idea that we talked about in my cruise book where I wrote, on my wall when I was looking for the job, I had about 1,000 no's, N-O, 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 and all the way at the bottom, there was this yes. Well, that's exactly what the voiceover industry is. You have to audition about 40 jobs for every job you get. So think about it. You got to have 40 people say no to you, or not even respond because you don't even hear back, and you got to keep going. No matter how low you feel, no matter how bad it is, no matter how long it's been since you booked your last job, you got to keep going. And then, on the 40th, all of a sudden, you land a national campaign for a company, and you're doing radio spots, TV spots, and you're heard all over the country. But that's what voiceover is. It is an occupation of rejection, as all theater acting is. And eventually, you get the job. And I happen to be good at it, and I'm good at the rejection. And so, I've kind of found a match.
I love that terminology, an occupation of rejection. If that doesn't prepare somebody, nothing will.
Yep.
Wow. Now, who actually came up with the term Micha the Mouth?
Well, Micha the Mouth came from my friend Joel, who owns a design agency. I had come up with all these ideas, but he just said, it's all about your mouth. I mean, it's your voice. I do on-camera work now, too. But he just said Micha the Mouth, and it just kind of stuck. But, I'm going to say this. No matter what the branding is, no matter how good your website is, no matter all that stuff, no matter how talented you are, none of it means a thing if you don't have the marketing, if you don't have the passion, if you don't have the drive to keep going and make yourself rise above the waves. So all the good stuff you can have, there's lots of people in the industry who are more talented than me. But the thing that I have is my focus and my determination. And so often I've heard that, it's 10% talent and 90% marketing, drive, and passion. And that works. And I'm only starting. I mean, I've only been doing voiceover probably for about 6 years. So I'm young. I'm a baby. And I'm just breaking in. I mean, I do about a commercial or two a month. But, I mean, I can see 5-10 years down the road where I'm going to be doing a lot more. You have to pay your dues. And once you do that and you're accepted, people start knowing you, and then you start getting a lot more work.
Are you planning to write a book in the future about your work in the voiceover industry, just like you did with Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship?
I'm not planning to. People have said to me you should write a book about how to market your book since my book has done so well. And, this whole concept, the ideology and philosophy of how to go after your dream, I might. But I'll tell you right now, I don't have the time or energy to do it. What I really have the energy to do is take the cruise book and promote that because I believe that is such a unique book. And I also take all the rest of my time and energy to devote to doing voiceover and on-camera work. Then I take the rest of the energy and devote to my full-time job because I have another job on top of it. Because again, until I can make enough money, I live in a really beautiful area south, north of San Francisco, where the cost of living is like Manhattan. It's expensive. So, I have to actually carry 3 full-time jobs basically to make a living. And my wife works harder, is smarter, prettier, and, works longer than me. And that's what we need to do to kind of live the life that we live. So I do, it could be a book down the road, but, my focus right now is on a couple other things, but I definitely think that down the road I have a book in me. I'm not sure if it's on the voiceover industry as much as this whole concept of never taking no for an answer. So that's a question mark I have to kind of figure out.
When you first got into pursuing a career in the voiceover industry, you said that your wife wasn't happy, your first child was about to be born. Did it ever occur to you, did it ever cross your mind that failure could be a possibility?
Not really. I have to tell you a story. Before I got into the voiceover industry, I went to L.A., and I visited a very good friend of mine who's in the radio industry, and he took me around his office. And every person he introduced me, at this point I wasn't doing voiceover, I was working at a foundation, and every person he introduced me to, he said, oh, hey, I want you to meet Micha, and then they said, oh, hey, great to meet you, what do you do? And every person I had to tell what I did. And you see, I didn't care about what I did. I had no passion for what I did. I was like I was a person who just like punched the clock and left. And each person that I told, I could feel tears welling up inside of me. By the time I was done introducing myself to 10 people, I was a wreck. I was depressed. I needed to get out of there. And it made me realize, I wasn't proud. I wasn't excited. Imagine not being excited about yourself. That to me, that is like the worst thing that someone can say. Forget about everybody else in the world. Just think about yourself. If you don't want to talk about yourself, if you can't smile and laugh and be excited about here we go again. I'm back to the minutes of your life, the minutes of your day. If you can't talk about that with pride and joy, what are you doing? It's going to be over soon. And that's when I realized it. And so, that's how I kind of realized I had to go after my dream, and I had to do the voiceover thing. So I'm totally forgetting the question now, because I'm just so kind of enraptured in this idea of being miserable, and I realized that I had to go after what I did. So what was the question again?
The question was failure ever a possibility in your mind?
I don't think it was. I was so just focused on going after it, And there have been moments in my voiceover career. I remember this really funny moment where, my agent on their website, they have everybody's demo. So you see your name and it has your commercial demo narration. And for one day, I hadn't booked a couple jobs for a while, and I went onto the website and my name was gone. My reel was not there, and I said, "Oh my God, they fired me. I'm gone. I'm done." Because I was with the biggest agent in San Francisco. I'm like, and I just had this empty feeling in my stomach, like, what am I going to do? This is my love. This is my passion. And so, I don't think I've entertained that thought. I just really feel that I'm going to go 150 miles per hour. But look, in everything I've done, there's been rejection and failure. So at first I didn't get the agent. I tried to get into voiceover in New York City way before I ever got an agent. And I was so ambitious that I got into the office of an agent in New York. This is years before I became a professional voiceover artist. And she actually signed me as a free agent because I was so, persistent to get to her. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't trained, Preparation meets opportunity. The whole idea is you got to be prepared. And then when you're prepared, the opportunity will come across. Well, I wasn't prepared. So I was going out and doing these Pepsi commercials, but I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I would see this line and I didn't know what to do. But, years later, I was prepared, and then opportunities started to walk across my path, and I was able to grab it. I don't know. I don't think that much about rejection. I'm not really that self-conscious. I don't really care what other people think as much. And so I think that, failure, I know it's there, and I've experienced it. So, it's bad. I mean, I take things personally, but, in the end, I've always bounced back.
Now, you mentioned 3 very important components, saying you can have talent, but you need these 3 other components. You said marketing, you said drive, you said passion. Of those 3, marketing, drive, and passion, which one is most important to you?
Well, my gut answer is they're all so crucial. You cannot remove one. But if you're going to say which one's the most important, I'm going to go to the passion. It is the burn. It's the inner core. It is what keeps the engine going. Without it, I can't do the marketing. I can't do anything. I can't study. I can't go to classes. I can't deal with my family. I can't keep going when everyone's saying no. I have to have that passion. When that passion's gone, I can go do something else. My other gut instinct is the marketing is so crucial. You gotta go, especially with the book. In terms of selling a book like that, you really gotta be going everywhere. Your name has to be out there. You have to be doing different angles. You have to be going all the time. With voiceover work, the marketing is important. Once you've got your branding down and who you are, it becomes an issue of really getting really good at what you do and getting as many auditions. The way to get to the job is by getting rejected. So you need to get all those rejections in order to get the job. So it's all about auditioning. Someone told me recently, voiceover work and on-camera work, it's all about auditioning. It's all about just getting as many as you can get, and then eventually you're going to hit. So that's what it's really about.
If you could go back in time and visit your younger self, knowing everything that you've learned in both your careers, what advice would you give you?
I'd grab me by the shoulders or the ears, I'd sit me down, and I would say, for God's sakes, go after your dream now. Don't wait a year, don't wait 5 years, don't wait 10 years, don't wait 15. Stop listening to what parents, family, newspapers, forget it all. Go after what your instinct and your gut tells you. Because if I would have done that, and look, I'm not sour grapes, okay? I'm doing very well. I'm in my early 40s. I've got an agent. I've got a great book out there. I'm doing voiceover work. I got a beautiful wife. I got great kids. I live in a great part of the country. However, if I would have been going after this at the age of 20, God knows what kind of level of work I would be doing. I've got to catch up now. It's going to take me a couple more years. I got to catch up. But getting in there earlier, I could have honed my experience and my skills a lot quicker. So, again, this is a question that, what's the point? Because I can't go back in time. I can't do it. But there are other people out there that may be listening right now who are at that point. And, don't push it off for another 5-10 years. Go for it now. Make sure it's the right decision and you have the means to do it. But that to me is the biggest piece of advice. I dropped out of law school. I did all these things. I tried all these things. That was part of my journey. I mean, I had to do that to get to the point to realize what is my right path. And, day to day, I had these great epiphanies where I look up and I say, I love what I do. I look at that mountain. I really have these great moments where I know I'm doing the right thing. But I can't forget that there were moments of tears and struggle and challenges and loneliness and depression because of that fight against that inner struggle of what I should do. So, I think simply I would just, knock myself against the head and say, hey, go after it. It's as simple as that.
Something you keep bringing up, and I really would like to ask you a question about this. You keep referring to the minutes of your life. And in my own development, for my own work, a number of people that I've met through doing this radio show, it's the idea that we're so consciously aware of the importance of the time we have left, how little of it we have left, and making the most of what we have left. So I have to ask you this very private question.
Sure.
Do you consider your own mortality?
Absolutely. I'm like an emotional wreck about it. I think about it all the time. I mean, a couple years ago, we had our little boy started, realizing about dying, and he went through this, mini depression when we were on a vacation in Hawaii, and I was like, my God. It caused all the stuff for me. I am an eternal questioner, thinker. I mean, I lie up at night thinking about this stuff. I am not the kind of person like my wife. If I'm on a plane and the plane's shaking, my wife is like this stoic person, right, who just if we're going to die, we're going to die. I'm jumping up in my seat. I'm grabbing her hand. I'm thinking, I'm like this emotional wreck. So for me, it's really an unresolved question. I respect people out there that have found religion and God, and they know that's great, and I respect it. I also respect people who are, agnostics, who are skeptical and don't know if there's something. And so, where do I fall in? I fall in somewhere in between, but it's definitely something that I think about. I'm also a person who, for a long time, hasn't been able to appreciate the moment, the flower, the smell, looking around. Because when you have the frenetic, obsessive passion and drive of what you've heard in this interview from the book and the voiceover, many times you are moving so fast, you don't have time to breathe, yet look around and really take in. So when do you enjoy it? You enjoy it at the mountaintop after you do that commercial, and then you're like, oh, wow, that was great. Or you enjoy it when you look up at your book and you see your book's #1 on Amazon. Whoa, that was great. But the problem is there's so much time in between where you haven't enjoyed life. And so I think, I'm fairly young. I'm 41. I feel like I'm kind of at a point in my life right now, and you see it with your kids, that you're starting to kind of look around and you start to realize, wow, I'm halfway there. Who knows? I look at my wife and I think, I'm not going to be with her. We're going to be separated. It's just this sad thing that you make these connections with people, and you're wondering, will you ever see them again? And I know these are huge questions, and I know that you can find the answers through Buddhism, Christianity, or whatever, and I'm in search of that. And I think I'm, starting to find my peace, but there's a lot of anxiety around it. So the simple answer to your question is I absolutely consider my mortality. And I think it's one of the reasons this clicking, this ticking clock, I'm alluding to a moment in my life where I actually looked at a clock and heard the ticking, and I hadn't started going after my dream. And I realized at that moment that I had been living my life for other people, and no one really would care in the end because those people would all be dead. But in the end, I had to do it for myself because I was looking at myself in the mirror, and it was my clock, nobody else's. And so that was a turning point in my life.
I find that for people who make things happen in their life, the acknowledgement that their life will come to an end is always a key factor.
Yeah.
And I have to agree with everything you said. I completely relate to it. And I think you got a really good, strong woman as your wife who is probably an incredible support to you.
She is. I'm like that. She is. She's much smarter. She's much more beautiful. She's much more grounded. And I need that. I didn't marry myself. God knows that would have been the end. So she really is a very strong support. I think she really gets a big kick out of my personality and who I am. And, it's a match made in heaven. God knows I'm looking at marriages left and right, disintegrating around me. My parents have been married 50 years and still hold hands, so I've got a good role model there. But it's a really hard thing to make it work. But, a lot of the passion that I scared the death out of her when I was dating her, and we don't have time to get into that. I sent her like 50 to 60 Dalmatians. So, this passion, little, stuffed animals, this passion that I have, I take into my own personal romantic life, which has been its own roller coaster. And you can imagine where that has gone with that deep, strong passion. I've had some real pain, but some real great joys. And in the end, I found the right person for me. So, there's pluses and minuses to this passion.
If someone wanted to get in contact with you, whether to do another media interview or to buy your book or to hire you to do some voiceover work, give me the contact information.
Well, first for the book, Permanent Passenger, My Life on a Cruise Ship is listed on Amazon, which is the easiest place to get it. It's also on all online retailers. You can buy BarnesandNoble.com, Borders.com. You can go to PermanentPassenger.com, which is the official Lulu website, PermanentPassenger.com, and there you can buy the book. But as I said before, these are all the different places to get the book. In terms of voiceover, and there's contact information for me there too, MichaTheMouth.com. MichaTheMouth.com. That's my official website for my voiceover and on-camera work. And on that website, there's also a page about the book where you can find articles, interviews, all that stuff is there. There's also my agent's name and my contact information there. So, and I respond in real time to people. And I get emails all the time about my book and stuff, and I will, give tips. I will talk to people. Whatever needs to be done, I will do it. But PermanentPassenger.com, MichaTheMouth.com, and simply Amazon is a great place to go, as well as Lulu.com.
And for those people out there who may not know how to spell Micha, can you give us the proper spelling?
Sure,
so
it's M-I-C-H-A, Micha, M-I-C-H-A.
All right. Micha, it's been absolutely great having you on the show. I sincerely hope that you'll put out a new book, a new project, so we can interview you again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been an absolute blast.
All right. Folks, you're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. Good night.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by From Loser to Seducer by Frank B. Kermit. He was stood up at his prom. He lost his fiancée to one of his best friends. He went 5 years with no sex, and then he turned it all around. From Loser to Seducer is the story of Frank B. Kermit. It's a story of pain, change, and the redemption of a seducer in training. This includes managing 5 lovers at the same time, his first Valentine's Day with 2 women at the same time, and getting back the one that got away. This book marks the triumph of a nice guy over most of his inner demons. Want to learn how to get back the one woman that got away? Buy this book at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. Ladies, does your man squash your inner vixen? When you ask him to repeat what you have just said to him, does he look at
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the book I'm a Man, That's My Job, The Philosophy of a Seducer. What is inner game? There's a lot of contradictory information out there, and one size does not fit all. Your inner game is as unique and personal as your signature or your fingerprints. This book provides you with the means to create your own seduction persona. This is a workbook, which means we will work together, and by the end, you will have developed your own personal inner game. By this, learn what it means to be a man and what the role of the modern man in today's society is that will attract him to the woman he wants. Learn about how men and women think differently and how to take the lead in a relationship. This book is for you at franktalks.com.